Circus sideshows, or freak shows as they were once called, were a blend of wonder, curiosity, and exploitation. In the 17th and 18th centuries, performers with unique physical traits were exhibited as curiosities in marketplaces, and it was pretty normal. By the 19th century, these spectacles had transformed into a booming industry, attracting massive crowds. Fueled by figures like P.T. Barnum, sideshows thrived on exaggerated storytelling and public fascination. While some performers found fame and fortune, others endured humiliation and hardship, all while challenging societal notions of normal. Here are 15 dark secrets behind the captivating world of circus freak shows that will both shock and fascinate you, and maybe a bit angry. Number 15. Exploitation disguised as entertainment. The heart of the circus freak show industry was exploitation. Performers were rarely viewed as humans. Instead, they were commodities whose value lay in their ability to shock and entertain. Showmen often recruited people from vulnerable communities, orphans, impoverished families, or those with rare conditions, and used contracts to trap them in exploitative agreements. Despite being the stars of the show, most performers received meager pay, with managers pocketing the lion's share of the profits. Performers' personal lives were also tightly controlled, with schedules designed to maximize profits at the expense of their well-being. While the audience marveled at the uniqueness of these individuals, they rarely considered the conditions they endured behind the scenes. For many performers, the stage wasn't an opportunity, but a gilded cage. The dark irony lies in how the freak show industry thrived under the guise of entertainment, masking its true nature as a deeply exploitative business that dehumanized its most vulnerable stars. Number 14. The manufactured freaks. Not all sideshow performers were born with unique conditions. Some were created through disturbing means. Circus managers, driven by profit, went to great lengths to produce freaks when natural ones weren't available. This often involved physical alterations, deception, or outright fabrication. For instance, some animals and humans were surgically altered or tattooed to appear more exotic. Stories were spun about performers' origins, claiming they were from far-off lands or the result of mythical curses. In some cases, individuals were forced into unnatural behaviors to fit a fabricated persona, such as walking on all fours or wearing grotesque costumes. Managers took advantage of the audience's curiosity and ignorance, building elaborate narratives to boost ticket sales. These manufactured freaks highlight the sinister side of the industry, where human and animal suffering was deliberately engineered for profit. Behind the dazzling posters and bold claims lay a web of deceit, cruelty, and greed that fueled the freak show phenomenon. Number 13. Children sold to the sideshow. One of the darkest aspects of the circus freak show industry was the recruitment of children. Families facing extreme poverty or societal stigma would sometimes sell their children to sideshows, viewing it as their only option for survival. These kids, many of whom had physical or developmental differences, became lifelong attractions. They were raised in environments that prioritized profit over their well-being, with little access to education or a stable home life. Managers exploited their youth, marketing them as innocent curiosities to draw larger crowds. As these children grew older, they often remained trapped in the industry, with no other skills or opportunities to support themselves. Some were coerced into marriages with other performers to create the next generation of attractions. The cycle of exploitation spanned generations, perpetuating the suffering of vulnerable individuals. These children were robbed of their childhoods and forced to become commodities in an unforgiving world of spectacle and greed. Number 12. The captivity of performers. Performers in sideshows often lived under conditions resembling captivity. Contracts were deliberately restrictive, tying performers to managers or circuses with no means of escape. Housing was typically cramped, unhygienic, and separate from other circus staff, further isolating them. Some performers were confined to cages or kept in areas designed to enhance their otherness. Managers controlled every aspect of their lives, from their daily routines to their public personas. Even their appearances were sometimes manipulated. Costumes, makeup, and prosthetics were used to exaggerate their differences. Attempts to leave the industry were met with threats, financial penalties, or outright coercion. Many performers didn't know how to live outside the sideshow circuit, as their entire identity had been shaped by exploitation. For those with physical disabilities or rare conditions, the loss of employment often meant poverty and neglect. The captivity of sideshow performers illustrates how their lives were shaped by control, isolation, and systemic abuse. Number 11. The dehumanizing names. In the world of circus freak shows, names were as much a tool of exploitation as the performances themselves. Performers were rarely referred to by their real names. Instead, they were given demeaning stage names that emphasized their differences. Terms like the Elephant Man, the Bearded Woman, and the Living Skeleton were crafted to draw in curious audiences while reducing individuals to their physical conditions. These names erased the humanity of the performers, framing them as novelties or curiosities rather than people with thoughts, emotions, and dreams. Marketing campaigns leaned heavily on these labels, plastering them across posters, advertisements, and newspapers. This branding often followed performers for life, overshadowing any attempts they made to assert their identities beyond the stage. The use of such names not only exploited their conditions, but also reinforced societal prejudices, perpetuating the idea that they were less than human, a notion that still haunts us today. Number 10. The myth of acceptance. While some circus freak show performers found camaraderie among their peers, the idea of true acceptance was often an illusion. The public was drawn to their uniqueness, but viewed them as spectacles rather than individuals. Inside the industry, competition for attention and earnings sometimes creates tension among performers. Managers often pitted them against one another, fostering rivalry to maintain control. Additionally, performers were rarely treated equally outside the circus. The societal prejudice they faced didn't disappear when the curtains closed. In fact, it followed them everywhere. Many lived dual lives, adored on stage but ostracized in their personal lives. The fleeting applause of an audience couldn't erase the stigma or alienation they experienced daily. The family of the sideshow was more a business arrangement than a bond of belonging. This myth of acceptance underscores the deeper loneliness and exploitation that many performers endured, despite the facade of community portrayed to the public. Number 9. Medical exploitation. The medical community, far from being an ally, often contributed to the exploitation of circus performers. Doctors would publicly diagnose individuals as part of the act, framing their conditions as scientific curiosities to draw in audiences. These diagnoses were rarely aimed at helping performers, but rather at feeding the public's morbid fascination. In some cases, medical examinations were conducted on stage, turning private health matters into spectacles. Performers were poked, prodded, and paraded as medical anomalies, further dehumanizing them. The medical exploitation didn't stop at performances. Researchers often sought to study performers without consent, publishing their findings in academic journals that objectified their subjects. For many, this intrusion into their lives added another layer of indignity, as their conditions were discussed and dissected without any concern for their humanity. The role of the medical community in sideshows reveals how even institutions meant to protect and heal could become complicit in exploitation. Number 8. Public humiliation. The sideshow industry didn't just thrive on curiosity, it fed on humiliation. Performers were often presented in exaggerated ways, with acts designed to provoke laughter, shock, or even disgust. Managers encouraged audiences to mock and ridicule performers, framing their differences as something to be derided rather than respected. Some shows even invited audience participation, allowing spectators to interact with performers in demeaning ways. This culture of humiliation extended beyond the stage, as performers were frequently subjected to verbal abuse and harassment in their daily lives. For many, the public ridicule became a source of deep emotional pain, compounding the challenges they already faced. The applause of a crowd often masked an undercurrent of cruelty, as audiences sought entertainment at the expense of another's dignity. This dynamic reveals the darker side of human nature and the ease with which society can turn a blind eye to suffering when it's packaged as amusement. Number 7. The rise of freak marriages. The sideshow industry didn't just exploit individual performers, it also manipulated their personal relationships. Managers orchestrated marriages between performers, not for love, but for profit. These unions were often heavily publicized, framed as spectacles to draw in curious crowds. For example, the marriage of General Tom Thumb to Lavinia Warren was billed as the wedding of the century, attracting thousands of spectators and generating enormous revenue. While some of these marriages may have been genuine, many were arranged solely for their promotional value. Performers had little say in the matter, as refusing could mean losing their livelihoods. The children of these unions were sometimes marketed as the next generation of attractions, further perpetuating the cycle of exploitation. These so-called freak marriages highlight how deeply the industry intruded into the personal lives of its performers, turning even their most intimate moments into commodities for public consumption. Number 6. The role of fear. The sideshow industry didn't just rely on fascination, it also weaponized fear. Managers often framed performers as monstrous or unnatural, playing on societal anxieties about difference and deformity. Posters depicted performers in grotesque ways, exaggerating their features to evoke both curiosity and dread. This tactic wasn't just about drawing crowds, it reinforced harmful stereotypes and stigmas. By presenting performers as something to fear, sideshows perpetuated the idea that physical or mental differences were something to be avoided or ridiculed. This fear-mongering extended to interactions with audiences, who were sometimes encouraged to confront their own fears by viewing the performers up close. While this strategy was effective in filling seats, it came at the expense of the performers, who were further alienated and dehumanized. The use of fear as a marketing tool underscores the industry's willingness to exploit the most negative aspects of human curiosity for profit. Number 5. The financial exploitation. While circus freak shows generated immense profits, the performers themselves rarely saw a fair share of the earnings. Managers controlled the finances, often underpaying performers or outright withholding their wages. Contracts were deliberately vague or exploitative, ensuring that most of the money went into the pockets of the showrunners. Even when performers achieved fame, they remained financially dependent on the circus, as they had few opportunities to earn outside the industry. Many performers ended their careers penniless, despite years of hard work and public adoration. This financial exploitation wasn't limited to wages. Performers were often charged for their housing, costumes, and travel expenses, further reducing their earnings. The industry thrived on greed, with little regard for the welfare of the people who made it successful. Number 4. Fabricated stories and lies. Freak show managers were master storytellers, but their tales were often far from the truth. To attract audiences, they fabricated elaborate backstories for performers, painting them as survivors of shipwrecks, members of lost civilizations, or victims of mythical curses. These stories weren't just exaggerated, they were outright lies, designed to heighten the mystique of the sideshow. Performers were often forced to play along, adopting new names and personas to fit these fabricated narratives. While these stories brought in crowds, they also erased the performers' real identities, reducing them to characters in a fictional drama. The lies extended to their physical conditions as well, with managers exaggerating or even faking disabilities to make performers seem more unusual. This culture of deception highlights the lengths to which the industry would go to maintain its allure, even at the expense of the truth. Now, let's talk about Number 3. Dubious guardianship contracts. For many performers, especially those with severe physical or cognitive disabilities, guardianship contracts were a legal trap. These contracts often gave circus owners full control over a performer's life, finances, and even personal decisions. For instance, performers with conditions like dwarfism or microcephaly were frequently placed under the care of showmen who exploited their naivety and dependence. Schlitzie Surtees, a performer with microcephaly, was kept under such an arrangement for much of his life, with little autonomy over his earnings or day-to-day choices. While some guardians genuinely cared for their wards, many viewed them solely as cash cows. These arrangements ensured that performers remained tied to the sideshow, unable to leave or seek better opportunities. In some cases, they were abandoned when they became less profitable, leaving them with no support system or means to survive. Number 2. Dangerous stunts and acts. For some performers, simply existing wasn't enough to draw crowds. Audiences wanted to see danger and spectacle. As a result, freak show acts often included dangerous stunts that put performers' lives at risk. Sword swallowing, fire eating, and feats of strength were common, but they came with significant risks of injury or even death. Performers were rarely given proper training or safety precautions, as the show owners prioritized excitement over well-being. These acts also pushed performers with physical conditions to their limits, exacerbating health issues or causing long-term harm. Injuries were often ignored or downplayed, as performers were expected to get back on stage no matter the cost. The pressure to perform dangerous stunts was yet another layer of exploitation in an already brutal industry. Number 1. The rise of human zoos. In addition to individuals with physical conditions, freak shows often included exhibits of people from different cultures presented as human curiosities in what were essentially human zoos. Entire families were taken from their homelands and displayed as savages or exotics to reinforce colonialist ideologies. For instance, indigenous people from Africa, Asia, and the Americas were paraded as primitive or uncivilized, often in degrading settings meant to mimic their natural habitats. These exhibits not only dehumanized the individuals on display, but also spread harmful stereotypes that persisted for generations. The commodification of these cultures further highlighted the exploitation at the heart of the freak show industry, where profit always trumped humanity. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more content like this. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you in the next one.